Woman opens door for freezing snow leopard family. What happens next will amaze you. Margaret Chen pressed her gloved hands against the steering wheel of the Land Rover as the Himalayan storm turned the narrow mountain road into a river of ice and stone. It was December 8th, 2 years to the exact day. Her fingers went numb despite the gloves as she approached kilometer marker 23, the place where the mudslide had swept her daughter's research vehicle off the cliff, where her 28-year-old daughter, Dr. Lily Chen, took her last breath, trapped in twisted metal 300 meters below, while Margaret screamed from the road above, watching helplessly as rescue teams worked for 6 hours to recover a body instead of a living person. Margaret made this journey every year, flying from Seattle to Kathmandu, then driving 4 hours into the Langtang region to place white chrysanthemums at the small memorial stone local villagers had placed at the roadside, crying for 30 minutes in the cutting wind, then returning to her hotel room and drinking whiskey until she could not feel anything anymore. But this year would be different. This year, at the exact spot where she lost her daughter, Margaret would find another mother freezing to death in the snow, another family destroyed by the same merciless mountains, and she would face a choice that would test everything she had left inside her broken heart. What happened next would change everything Margaret believed about loss, about purpose, and about whether a mother who failed to save her child deserved a second chance at anything. Margaret had been in Kathmandu attending a conservation conference when the mudslide happened. Lily had been doing field research on snow leopards, her passion, her life's work, studying their migration patterns in these remote mountains. She had called Margaret 3 days before the accident, voice crackling through bad satellite connection saying, "Mom, I saw a female with 2 cubs today. Absolutely magnificent. I am getting incredible data. This is going to change everything we know about maternal behavior in high-altitude environments." Margaret had said, "That is wonderful, sweetheart. Be careful on those roads. The monsoon season makes them unstable." Lily had laughed, that bright, fearless laugh that Margaret would never hear again, and said, "I am always careful, Mom. I love you. Talk soon." Those were the last words Margaret heard her daughter speak. "I love you. Talk soon." Except there was no soon. There was only the call at 2 a.m. 3 days later. "Your daughter's vehicle. There has been an accident. Please come immediately." Margaret remembered nothing of that drive except the sound of her own breathing, too fast, too shallow, like her lungs had forgotten how to work properly. She remembered her hands shaking so violently on the steering wheel that she had to pull over twice to vomit on the roadside. She remembered arriving to find rescue workers still on ropes, descending into the ravine, their headlamps cutting through darkness like searching for something already lost. They brought Lily up 6 hours later. Margaret had stood on the road, held back by police officers who said, "You cannot go down there. It is too dangerous, the slope is unstable. Please, Mrs. Chen, please step back." She had watched them bring her daughter up in a body bag, and something inside her chest had shattered so completely that she felt the pieces fall through her ribcage and disappear into some dark place she would never be able to reach again. The doctor at the hospital in Kathmandu said it was quick. Massive internal injuries from the impact. She did not suffer long. Margaret knew he was lying to be kind. She had heard Lily's screams echoing up from that ravine in the first hour, before they stopped, before there was only silence and the sound of rescue workers calling down into darkness with no answer coming back. 2 years of therapy sessions where Dr. Patel, a gentle woman with kind eyes and infinite patience, asked questions Margaret refused to answer. "How are you sleeping?" "Not at all." "Are you eating regularly?" "Does it matter?" "Have you considered joining a grief support group?" "No." "Do you blame yourself for what happened?" "Yes." "Why do you blame yourself?" "Because I should have stopped her. I should have told her not to go to those mountains. I should have been a different kind of mother, the kind who keeps her child safe." Dr. A. Patel would say gently, "You cannot control nature. You cannot control accidents. Your daughter was an adult who made her own choices about her work and her passion." And Margaret would nod and say nothing, because there was nothing to say that would change the fundamental truth that her daughter was dead and she was alive, and that felt wrong in ways that therapy could not fix. 2 years of her ex-husband Robert calling from Seattle, saying, "You need to come home. You cannot stay in Nepal living in hotel rooms, punishing yourself. This is not healthy." Robert, who had flown to Kathmandu for the funeral, who had held Margaret while she vomited in the hospital bathroom after identifying Lily's body, who had sat with her through the cremation ceremony at Pashupatinath Temple, while Hindu priests chanted prayers neither of them understood, and smoke from Lily's burning body rose into gray Kathmandu sky. Robert had tried for 2 years, called every week, sent emails, begged her to come back to Seattle, to see her friends, to return to teaching at the university, to do anything except this annual pilgrimage to the place where their daughter died. But after 2 years, even Robert's patience had limits. The last time they spoke, he said, "I will always love you, Margaret. I will always love the woman you were, the mother you were to Lily. But I cannot watch you destroy yourself anymore. I cannot keep calling just to hear you confirm that you are still drowning. I need to let you go now. I need to save myself even if you will not save yourself." Margaret had said, "I understand. Thank you for trying. I am sorry I am not fixable." And he had cried on the phone, this man who rarely cried, and said, "You are not broken. You are grieving. But you will not let anyone help you grieve. You just want to die with her, and I cannot watch that anymore." They had not spoken in 4 months. Margaret knew with absolute certainty that everything was her fault. She had encouraged Lily's love of animals from childhood, had taken her to zoos, wildlife sanctuaries, national parks, had bought her books about endangered species, had been so proud when Lily announced she wanted to study conservation biology, had helped her apply to graduate programs, had celebrated when she got into the PhD program at University of Washington, had supported her decision to focus on snow leopards, to do field research in the Himalayas, had said, "How brave you are, sweetheart, how wonderful to dedicate your life to protecting these magnificent creatures." If Margaret had been a different mother, if she had discouraged instead of encouraged, if she had said, "No, those mountains are too dangerous, study something safer, work in a lab, teach at a university, stay close to home," then Lily would still be alive, would be 30 years old now instead of permanently 28, would maybe be married, maybe thinking about children of her own, maybe teaching, maybe still doing research but somewhere safe. Somewhere that did not have roads that collapsed in monsoon season and sent vehicles tumbling 300 meters into ravines. The snow fell heavier as Margaret pulled the Land Rover to the shoulder at 3:47 in the afternoon, the exact time the mudslide had hit according to the police report she had read so many times she had it memorized. Time of incident: 15:47. Location: kilometer marker 23, Langtang Road. Cause: monsoon destabilization of slope, resulting in catastrophic mudslide. Vehicle pushed approximately 300 meters down ravine. Driver: Dr. Lily Chen, age 28, American citizen. Injuries: fatal. Time of death: estimated 21:34. Pronounced deceased at 22:15 by attending physician at Tribhuvan University Teaching Hospital. Margaret grabbed the white chrysanthemums from the passenger seat, the same flowers Lily had loved since childhood. When Lily was 7, they had planted chrysanthemums together in the garden of their Seattle home. Lily had gotten dirt all over her face and hands and had been so proud when the first flowers bloomed. She would pick them and braid them into crowns and dance around the yard like a fairy princess, while Margaret laughed and took pictures she now could not look at without breaking. After Lily died, Margaret had gone to that garden one last time before selling the house. The chrysanthemums were still there, white and perfect, blooming like nothing had changed, like the world had not ended. She had dug them all up with her bare hands, crying and screaming, ripping them from the earth, throwing them across the yard because how dare they bloom, how dare anything be beautiful when Lily was dead. Then she had collapsed in the dirt and gathered them all back up and held them against her chest and whispered, "I am sorry. I am so sorry." And she had replanted every single one with shaking hands because destroying them would not bring Lily back, would not change anything, would just add more destruction to a world that already had too much. She walked toward the memorial stone now, her boots crunching through ice, her breath forming clouds in the thin mountain air at 4,000 meters elevation. Her lungs ached with every breath. The altitude made everything harder, breathing, thinking, existing. But she came every year because this was where Lily had taken her last breath, and if Lily could die here, then Margaret could at least suffer here once a year, could at least feel some fraction of the pain her daughter had felt. Then she saw them. 50 meters down the slope, partially hidden behind a boulder formation, something moved against the white snow. A snow leopard, female, magnificent gray coat with black rosettes, lying on her side with 2 cubs pressed against her belly, all three shaking violently. The mother's flanks rose and fell in irregular gasps that Margaret could see even from this distance. Severe hypothermia. Margaret froze, her mind processing details with the strange clarity that comes from shock. Large paw prints in the snow, leading from higher up the mountain down to this exposed position. No shelter here, just rock and ice and wind. Drag marks in the snow, as if something heavy had been pulled. Dark stains near the rocks, blood, frozen and scattered. Then Margaret saw it, 30 meters further down the slope, partially covered by fresh snow. The body of a male snow leopard, magnificent even in death, neck twisted at an impossible angle, one leg bent wrong, face peaceful like he had died protecting something. Margaret understood immediately. Rockfall. The male had been killed, probably shielding his family when rocks came loose from above. The female had dragged the cubs to this boulder, trying to find protection from the wind. But there was no real shelter here. She was dying. The cubs, perhaps 10 weeks old, impossibly small and fragile, tried to nurse, but their mother had nothing left to give. They were so weak their cries were barely audible over the wind. The mother snow leopard lifted her head with immense effort. Her pale green eyes, clouded with pain and exhaustion, found Margaret's. There was no fear in those eyes. No territorial aggression. No warning. Just resignation. Acceptance. She was dying and she knew it. But her cubs needed help, and she had no help to give except to wait here, closer to the road, closer to where humans might pass, and hope. Margaret fell to her knees in the snow. The chrysanthemums slipped from her hands, white petals scattering across ice. The mother snow leopard had not just been trying to shelter the cubs from the cold. The tracks in the snow told a different story. She had used her last remaining strength to drag them 3 meters closer to the road, closer to the cars, closer to humans. She was waiting for someone to stop, just like Margaret had waited for someone to save Lily in that ambulance. Just like she had begged the doctors at the hospital, please do something. Please save her. Please do not let her die. Just like she had tried to negotiate with God, with the universe, with anything that might be listening, take me instead. Take anything. Just give me back my daughter. Just like she had learned that begging changes nothing, that some things cannot be fixed, that sometimes you lose everything and there is no trade, no negotiation, no second chance. But here now, at this exact spot where Margaret had lost everything, another mother was losing everything. And this one time, Margaret could do something. She ran to the Land Rover, started the engine, cranked the heat to maximum. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the key. She grabbed the emergency blankets from the back, the medical kit, the portable heater she carried obsessively since Lily's death, always prepared, always too late, always carrying equipment that could have saved a life 2 years ago, but was useless now except for this moment, these lives that were not her daughter, but were someone's children, and maybe that mattered, maybe that was enough. When she approached, the mother leopard did not growl, did not try to rise, just watched with those pale green eyes that held intelligence and pain and something that looked like hope. When Margaret picked up the first cub, frozen solid, lips turning blue, barely breathing, the mother leopard closed her eyes as if saying, yes, please, take them, save them, I cannot. Margaret wrapped both cubs in thermal blankets and placed them in the back seat between portable heaters. She checked their breathing, shallow and irregular, checked their heart rates, too slow, too weak. She had taken wilderness first aid training after Lily died, another thing she did too late. Learning skills that could have mattered 2 years ago but were useless now except for this. She adjusted the heaters, made sure the cubs were positioned so they could not fall, whispered, hold on, just hold on, I have you. Then she returned for the mother. The snow leopard weighed approximately 45 kilograms. Margaret weighed 62. She tried to lift the animal and failed. Her back screamed. Her arms had no strength. 2 years of barely eating, barely sleeping, barely existing had left her weak in ways she had not realized. She tried again. Failed again. Started crying from frustration and fear and the terrible knowledge that she was going to fail again, was going to watch another mother die while her children needed her. The leopard groaned softly but did not resist. Margaret realized the truth. The leopard wanted to be moved. She was asking for help in the only way she could. Margaret got behind the leopard, grabbed under the front legs, and pulled. The leopard helped weakly with her back paws when she had strength. Margaret dragged centimeter by centimeter through ice and rock. Every meter felt impossible. Her back screamed. Her lungs could not get enough oxygen in this thin air. Sweat poured down her face despite the freezing temperature. She screamed, "Come on," to herself and the leopard and God and Lily and anyone who might be listening in this God-forsaken mountain that took everything from everyone. She screamed, "I am not losing you. Do you hear me? I am not losing you. You are not dying here. Your babies need you. You do not get to die." She screamed until her throat was raw, and then she screamed more because screaming was better than the silence, better than the voice in her head saying, "You failed before. You will fail now. You always fail when it matters." It took 20 minutes to drag the leopard 15 meters. Margaret collapsed twice, got up twice, kept pulling. When she finally got the leopard into the back seat beside the cubs, Margaret collapsed into the driver's seat. She could not feel her hands, could not catch her breath. Her vision was blurry from tears and sweat and exhaustion. She looked in the rearview mirror. The mother leopard had managed to turn her head toward the cubs. Her rough tongue, dry and weak, licked them gently. First one cub, then the other, making sure they were real, were alive, were safe. Her eyes closed and opened slowly, fighting to stay conscious, fighting to keep watch over her children, even though she had nothing left to give except this vigilance, this refusal to abandon them even in her last moments. Margaret hit the accelerator. Not back toward the village where she had come from. That was 40 minutes in good conditions, over an hour in this storm. Forward, toward the wildlife research station at Kianjin-gompa, 50 minutes away, where Lily had worked 2 years ago, where Lily's colleagues might still be, where someone might be able to help, where there was medical equipment and people who knew snow leopards who might be able to save them. She drove with tears streaming down her face, whispering, "Hold on, please hold on, do not leave them, do not leave," not knowing if she was talking to the leopards or to Lily's ghost or to herself. The windshield wipers fought against snow that fell like the mountains were trying to erase the entire world. Visibility was maybe 20 meters. The road was ice. Margaret's Land Rover slid twice on ice patches, fishtailed once, nearly went off the edge of the road into another ravine. She corrected, kept going, one hand on the wheel, eyes checking the mirror every few seconds to make sure the mother leopard was still breathing, still fighting, still alive. The cubs had stopped shivering, which could mean they were warming up in the heated vehicle, or could mean they were dying, could mean their bodies were shutting down, could mean she was too late again. Margaret pressed harder on the accelerator. The speedometer read 60 kilometers per hour, which was insane on this road in the storm, but she did not care. She thought about the moment Lily died, how she had stood on the road at kilometer marker 23, screaming her daughter's name into the ravine. "Lily, Lily, can you hear me? I am here. Help is coming. Hold on." How there had been an answer at first, weak crying from below. "Mom, Mom, it hurts. I cannot move." How Margaret had screamed to the rescue workers, "Hurry, please hurry. She is alive. She is talking." How the rescue worker had said, "We are going as fast as we can. The slope is unstable. If we go faster, we risk another slide." How Margaret had wanted to go down herself, had tried to grab the rope, had been held back by police who said, "You will die too. You cannot help her by dying." How she had stood there useless while her daughter was 300 meters below in twisted metal, and all Margaret could do was listen as Lily's voice got weaker, got quieter, got more confused. "Mom, I am cold. I know, baby. I know. Help is coming. Mom, I cannot feel my legs. It is okay, sweetheart. Do not worry about that. Just stay awake. Keep talking to me. Mom, I am scared. I know, baby. I am here. I am not leaving. You are going to be okay." How the rescue worker had climbed up 6 hours later, and before he said anything, before he opened his mouth, Margaret had known, had felt it in her chest. The exact moment when Lily's heart stopped beating because something in Margaret's own chest had torn in half at that same instant. How the rescue worker had just shaken his head and said, "I am sorry. We did everything we could. She is gone." How the words had not made sense at first. Gone where? Gone did not mean dead. Gone meant away, meant she could come back. But the rescue worker's face had told the truth. Gone meant forever. Gone meant never coming back. Gone meant Margaret's entire world had ended at kilometer marker 23 on a Tuesday afternoon in monsoon season. How her ex-husband Robert had flown in from Seattle, and they had gone to the hospital together and identified the body together. How the doctor had pulled back the sheet and Lily's face had been peaceful, almost like she was sleeping, except for the wrong angle of her neck, except for the blood dried at the corner of her mouth, except for the fact that she was not breathing, would never breathe again. How Robert had made a sound Margaret had never heard before, a sound like an animal caught in a trap. How Margaret had not made any sound at all because sound required breath and she could not breathe, could not pull air into her lungs, could not do anything except stand there looking at her daughter's dead face and thinking, this is not real, this cannot be real, I will wake up, this is a nightmare. But she had not woken up. 2 years later, and she still had not woken up. This was real. This was her life. Lily was dead and Margaret was alive, and nothing would ever change that. Margaret had spent 2 years believing she did not deserve happiness, did not deserve peace, did not deserve to continue breathing when her daughter had stopped. But somewhere in the last hour, dragging a dying snow leopard through snow at the site of her worst nightmare, something had shifted. She did not understand it yet. She just knew that if these leopards died, if she lost them too, something inside her would die as well. Something beyond what had already broken. Some final piece of her soul that was still fighting to survive. Dr. James Morrison was preparing to close the Kianjin-Gampa research station for the night when he heard a vehicle horn blaring outside. It was 6:30 on a dead Tuesday evening, storm getting worse by the minute. No one should be on these roads. No one in their right mind would be traveling in these conditions. He opened the door expecting lost trekkers or stranded locals, and found instead a woman stumbling from a Land Rover, face covered in sweat and tears, screaming, "I need help now. I have snow leopards. They are dying. Please help me." When he looked in the back seat, his medical training kicked in before his shock could register. A female snow leopard, 2 cubs, all in severe hypothermia, all critical. "You know I have to report this to the Conservation Authority immediately," he said, already grabbing a stretcher from inside, already moving on instinct. "I know," Margaret screamed, helping him lift the leopard, careful of the head, supporting the spine. "But first you save them, you understand. First you save them and then you report whatever you need to report." For the next 5 hours, Dr. James Morrison worked with the precision of someone who had spent 15 years studying these animals, who had done his doctorate on snow leopard conservation, who had worked with Lily Chen 2 years ago on her research project, and had been at her funeral, and had not recognized this woman as Lily's mother until much later when his mind had time to process. He took the mother's temperature first, 31 degrees Celsius. It should have been 38. This was severe, this was critical, this was the kind of hypothermia that killed. He checked her heart rate, 40 beats per minute, should be 90 to 140. He checked her respiration, 6 breaths per minute, should be 15 to 30. Every vital sign told him this leopard should already be dead. He started intravenous fluids immediately, warm saline solution, careful with the flow rate because warming too quickly could cause cardiac arrest. He wrapped her in heated blankets, not too hot, gradual warming was essential. He placed cardiac monitors, watched the irregular heartbeat on the screen, watched it dip and spike in ways that made his stomach clench. Severe dehydration. Her gums were pale, tacky. Skin had no elasticity. He increased the IV flow rate slightly. Acute malnutrition. He could feel every rib, every vertebra. This leopard had not eaten in days, maybe a week, maybe more. Every bit of nutrition in her body had gone to producing milk for the cubs. She had starved herself to feed them. The cubs were next. He measured their temperatures. 32 degrees Celsius. Critical. He checked their heart rates. Weak. Irregular. He placed them in a heated incubator with oxygen support. Both showed signs of hypoglycemia, dangerously low blood sugar. He started glucose injections, tiny doses for their tiny bodies. The smaller one, more delicate than his brother, showed fluid in his lungs when Dr. Morrison listened with his stethoscope. Early pneumonia. He started antibiotics immediately. Margaret did not leave the room. She sat on the floor in the corner watching every movement, every injection, every adjustment of monitors. When the leopard convulsed once, A violent full-body spasm as her body fought hypothermic shock. Margaret screamed and grabbed Dr. Morrison's arm hard enough to bruise. Do something. Do something now. Do not let her die. He was already doing something. Dextrose injection to raise blood sugar, more warming protocols, oxygen support. Everything he could think of, everything his training had taught him. But sometimes training was not enough. Sometimes animals died despite everything you did. He had seen it before, had lost patients before. But something about this woman's desperation, something about her screaming, "Do not let her die," with such raw pain that it sounded like she was the one dying, made him fight harder than he had ever fought. He had treated hundreds of animals in his 15-year career. He had treated snow leopards injured by poachers, by falls, by territorial fights, by failed hunts. Many of them had died. He had learned to maintain professional distance, to care about the animals without breaking his heart every time one did not survive. But he had never seen someone fight this desperately for animals they had found an hour ago. Never seen someone look at dying leopards like losing them would be losing everything. At midnight, after 5 hours of continuous work, the cardiac monitor on the mother leopard finally stabilized. The irregular heartbeat smoothed into something closer to normal. 60 beats per minute. Not perfect, but better. So much better. At 1:15, the cubs stopped shivering. Their breathing deepened. The oxygen saturation levels on the monitor climbed from dangerous to acceptable. At 2 in the morning, the mother leopard opened her eyes. Not fully conscious, but aware. She saw Margaret sitting on the floor watching her. She saw her cubs sleeping in the heated enclosure beside her, safe, warm, breathing. She made a soft chuffing sound, the sound snow leopards make to communicate with their young, to say, "I am here, you are safe, we are together." Then she closed her eyes again, but this time in peace instead of pain, this time in rest instead of death. Dr. Morrison sat on the floor next to Margaret. Both were exhausted. He had not eaten in 7 hours. His hands were shaking from adrenaline crash. He looked at this woman who had stumbled into his research station with dying leopards and had watched him work for 5 hours without speaking, without moving, barely breathing. "You saved them," he said quietly. "I do not know how you got them here in that storm, but you saved their lives." Margaret did not respond, just kept staring at the sleeping leopard. Dr. Morrison tried again. "You understand they cannot stay here long term. This is a research station, not a rehabilitation facility. The Conservation Authority will transfer them to a proper facility where they can receive long-term care." Margaret nodded slowly. "When?" "Tomorrow, probably. I have to call Tenzin Sherpa in the morning. He is the wildlife conservation officer for this region. He will arrange transport." Margaret turned to look at him for the first time. Her eyes were red from crying, exhausted beyond measure, but also fierce in a way that made Dr. Morrison uncomfortable. "You call whoever you need to call," she said. "But those leopards do not move until they are strong enough to survive transport. You understand me. They do not move until they are ready." Dr. Morrison nodded. "I understand." They sat in silence for a long time. Then Dr. Morrison said gently, "Can I ask why you did this? Stopped on that road in a blizzard for wild animals most people would be terrified of? Why you risked your life to save them?" Margaret did not answer for a long time. Then, without looking at him, she said, "My daughter died on that road 2 years ago today. I was coming to visit her memorial." Dr. Morrison felt something cold settle in his chest. "Oh God, I am so sorry. I did not. What was your daughter's name?" "Lily," Margaret whispered. "Lily Chen." Dr. Morrison's world tilted. Lily. Dr. Lily Chen, who had worked at this research station 2 years ago, who had been brilliant and passionate and had spent 6 months studying snow leopard maternal behavior, who had been killed in a mudslide on the Langtang Road, who he had gone to the funeral for, had watched them cremate her body at Pashupatinath Temple, had cried for this young woman with so much promise who had died too young. "I worked with Lily," he said quietly. "She was here for 6 months doing her field research. She was brilliant. She loved these mountains. She loved snow leopards more than anything. I am so sorry. I was at the funeral. I did not recognize you." Margaret nodded. I do not remember you being there. I do not remember anything from that week except pain. Dr. Morrison understood. Why did you stop for the leopards? He asked again, more gently this time. I could not save her, Margaret said, her voice breaking. But these I could save. They sat together in the medical room until dawn started to lighten the sky outside. Neither spoke. Both watched the leopards sleep, watched their chests rise and fall, watched the monitors that proved they were alive, that sometimes despite everything, despite the worst happening, sometimes you could save something. The next morning, December 9th, Tenzin Sherpa from the Nepal Department of National Parks and Wildlife Conservation arrived at 8. He was a Sherpa man in his 50s, weathered face, kind eyes, 20 years of experience managing wildlife conservation in the harshest environment on Earth. He examined the leopards with Dr. Morrison while Margaret watched from the corner. Mrs. Chen, he said finally, turning to face her. You did an extraordinary thing yesterday. You saved 3 endangered animals that would certainly have died. However, protocol is clear. Rescued endangered animals must be transferred to approved conservation facilities for assessment and rehabilitation. The leopards will go to the Central Zoo in Kathmandu. No, Margaret said. The word came out flat, final. Tenzin blinked. Excuse me? Not yet, Margaret said, standing up. The mother is weak. The cub has pneumonia. Moving them now could kill them. Dr. Morrison intervened, stepping between them. She is right, Tenzin. Medically speaking, transport now would be extremely high risk. The mother's vitals are still unstable. The smaller cub's pneumonia needs at least a week of antibiotics before we can safely move him. I recommend 1 week of stabilization minimum before any movement. Tenzin sighed. He had seen this before. People bonding with animals they should not bond with. People who saved wildlife and then could not let go. It complicated everything. 1 week, he said firmly. Then they must be transferred. No exceptions. Conservation protocol exists for good reasons. And Mrs. Chen, you understand you cannot visit them at the facility in Kathmandu. We must minimize human contact for any potential future release. The more they bond with humans, the less likely they can ever return to the wild. Margaret swallowed hard. 1 week. During that week, something fundamental changed in Margaret Chen. She did not return to her hotel in Kathmandu. She did not call Robert. She did not think about Seattle or her empty house or her job at the university that she had abandoned 2 years ago. She stayed at the research station. Dr. Morrison allowed it because she was genuinely helpful, because she had medical training from her work as a biology professor, because she could prepare formula and monitor vital signs and assist with treatments, but also because he remembered Lily, remembered how brilliant and passionate she had been about these mountains and these animals, and he could not bring himself to send her grieving mother away. Margaret learned everything. Dr. Morrison taught her how to prepare specialized formula for the cubs. Goat milk as the base, but with added supplements, proteins, fats, vitamins, everything cubs needed that their mother's milk would normally provide, but that she could not produce in her malnourished state. Every 3 hours, day and night, Margaret fed the cubs with small bottles designed for infant animals. Every 3 hours, she would warm the formula to exactly body temperature, test it on her wrist like you would for a human baby, then hold each cub carefully and let them drink. The cubs sucked with surprising strength once they recovered from hypothermia, their tiny paws kneading air instinctively, the same motion they would use when nursing from their mother, the motion that stimulates milk production. Margaret would hold them and feel their warmth and their trust, and something in her broken chest would ache in ways that were painful and healing simultaneously. She named them in her mind, knowing she should not, knowing Dr. Morrison and Tenzin would disapprove, knowing it was against every protocol about maintaining distance from wild animals, but unable to stop herself. Kieran, the larger one, darker rosettes, bold personality, always trying to explore beyond the heated enclosure, always curious. Asha, the smaller one, lighter coat, more cautious, the one with pneumonia who sometimes struggled to breathe even with antibiotics, who needed extra care, extra monitoring, who Margaret worried about constantly. The mother leopard. Margaret called her Zara, only in her thoughts, never out loud. Zara recovered slowly. On day 3, she stood for the first time, legs shaking like a newborn learning to walk. Dr. Morrison watched carefully, ready to intervene if she fell, but she did not fall. She stood, took 3 steps, then lay down again, exhausted from even that small effort. But it was progress. It was survival. On day 5, Zara ate raw goat meat for the first time since the rescue. Dr. Morrison had been offering food twice a day, and she had refused. Too weak, too traumatized, body too shut down to process food. But on day 5, she sniffed the meat and then tore into it with teeth designed for survival, with instincts that overcame trauma. She ate slowly, carefully, but she ate. And when she was done, she looked at Dr. Morrison with those pale green eyes that had seen death and chosen to keep fighting. There was a moment on the 4th day that destroyed Margaret in ways she had not expected. She was feeding Asha, the smaller cub with pneumonia. He had finished his bottle, and with his belly full and warm, with antibiotics working in his system, with safety and comfort for the first time since his father had been killed, he yawned and fell asleep in Margaret's hands, just curled up in her palms and trusted her completely. This tiny wild creature, who should have been terrified of humans, but instead felt safe enough to sleep. Margaret looked at that small bundle of gray fur with black rosettes sleeping in her palms, so vulnerable, so perfect, so alive. She remembered Lily at 6 months old, sleeping on her chest, the weight of her, the warmth, the absolute trust. That feeling that nothing in the world mattered except this tiny person who depended completely on you, who trusted you to keep them safe, who believed without question that you would protect them from everything. Margaret had not protected Lily, had not kept her safe, had encouraged her to follow her passion even though her passion led to dangerous mountains and unstable roads, and a death that should never have happened. Margaret sat holding Asha and cried silently for 30 minutes while the cub slept peaceful and unaware. Cried for Lily who had trusted her and died, cried for herself who had failed. Cried for this cub who was alive only because Margaret had not failed this time, had not driven past, had not abandoned another dying mother and her children. Zara watched from her recovery bed, did not react, did not make sounds, just observed with those intelligent green eyes that seemed to understand pain in ways that transcended species. End of the 7th day. Tenzin Sherpa returned with a transport team. 2 wildlife veterinarians, specialized crates, all the equipment necessary for moving endangered animals safely. "Time to go, Mrs. Chen," he said gently. "They are stable now. The mother is eating. The cub's pneumonia is responding to treatment. It is time for them to receive proper long-term care." Margaret had prepared herself, had told herself all week that this was temporary, that she was just helping them survive until they could be transferred to people who knew what they were doing, to proper facilities with proper resources. She had lied to herself that she was prepared. When the conservation team placed Zara and the cubs in transport crates designed for large cats, Zara resisted for the first time since the rescue. She did not fight, did not attack, but she pushed against the crate bars, looked desperately around the room for Margaret, made the chuffing sound that snow leopards make to communicate distress to their young. The cubs, sensing their mother's tension, sensing that something was wrong, began crying, high-pitched mews that sounded heartbreakingly like human babies. Margaret could not stand it. She approached the crates, put her hands against the bars even though Tenzin said, "Mrs. Chen, please step back. We need to minimize contact." Zara smelled Margaret's fingers through the bars. Her rough tongue, still dry despite days of recovery, touched Margaret's skin once, gently, like a thank you, like a goodbye. "You are going to be okay," Margaret whispered, knowing the leopard could not understand words but hoping she understood tone, hoping she understood love because that was what this was. This was love that made no sense but was real anyway. "You are going to raise them strong. They are going to grow up beautiful and wild like you. And one day you will go back to these mountains where you belong." Tenzin touched Margaret's shoulder gently. "You did something miraculous. You saved 3 lives that would have been lost. But now they need professional care, and they need distance from humans if they are ever to have a chance at survival in the wild. The more they bond with you, the less likely they can return to their natural habitat. You understand this. You know this is right." Margaret nodded, did not trust her voice, did not trust herself not to scream or beg or make a fool of herself. She watched the van drive down the mountain road until it disappeared around a bend and she could not see it anymore. Stood in the research station parking lot in the cold morning air until she could not feel her hands or feet. Dr. Morrison came out, stood beside her. "You want tea?" he asked quietly. "You look like you need tea. Maybe something stronger." "I need something stronger," Margaret replied, her voice hollow. "Much stronger." Dr. Morrison made her sit in his office, made her drink sweet tea with whiskey in it, even though it was 9 a.m, made her eat biscuits she did not taste. "You did an incredible thing," he said. Most people would have driven past, would have been too afraid or too indifferent or too focused on their own problems to stop. But you stopped. You risked your life in that storm. You saved them. You should be proud. "I do not feel proud," Margaret said. "I feel empty. I feel like I just lost something I was not supposed to have in the first place." "That is grief," Dr. Morrison said gently. "Even when you know something is right, even when you know they need to go, it still hurts to let them go. Especially for you. Especially today. 2 years since Lily, and you saved lives on the anniversary of losing her. That means something. That has to mean something." "Does it?" Margaret asked. "Does it change anything? Does it bring her back?" "No," Dr. Morrison admitted. "Nothing brings them back. But it means you are still here. Still capable of caring. Still capable of fighting for something. After what you have been through, that matters." Margaret did not believe him, but she drank the tea anyway. Margaret returned to Seattle 3 days later. Flew from Kathmandu to Delhi to Frankfurt to Seattle, 28 hours of travel that felt like moving through water. Like the world had slowed down and she was the only one who noticed. She took a taxi from the airport to the house she had not seen in 2 years. The house she and Robert had bought when Lily was 5. The house where they had raised their daughter, where Lily had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where she had grown up and become brilliant and passionate and dead. Robert had moved out a year ago. Sold his half to Margaret for almost nothing because he could not stand the thought of strangers living in Lily's house. Margaret walked through rooms that felt like museums. Everything exactly as it had been, frozen in time. Lily's bedroom she had not changed, had not touched. Kept exactly as it was. Textbooks on the desk from her undergraduate years. Research papers scattered from early grad school. Photographs of snow leopards pinned to the walls because even as a teenager, Lily had been obsessed with these animals, had covered her walls with pictures and maps and everything she could learn about the most elusive cats in the world. Margaret stood in the doorway of Lily's room and could not make herself walk inside. Not yet. Not today. She went to her own bedroom, lay down on the bed she had not slept in for 2 years, stared at the ceiling, and felt absolutely nothing. Numbness. Empty. Like someone had reached into her chest and scooped out everything that made her human and left just a shell walking around pretending to be alive. She tried to return to her life. Teaching biology at the university where she had worked for 23 years, grading papers, attending faculty meetings, pretending she was fine when colleagues asked, "How are you doing? It is so good to have you back. We missed you." She would smile and say thank you. "I missed you too," knowing it was a lie, knowing she had not thought about them once in 2 years, knowing she did not care about any of this anymore. The department chair called her into his office 1 month into the semester. "Margaret, I need to be honest with you. Your teaching evaluations are concerning. Students are saying you seem distracted, disconnected. Several have complained that you do not answer questions in class, that you seem to forget what you are teaching mid-lecture. Is everything all right?" Margaret wanted to laugh. Everything? No, everything was not all right. Her daughter was dead and she was alive, and she spent her days teaching 18-year-olds about cellular biology when the only cells she cared about were the ones that had stopped dividing in Lily's body 2 years ago. But she said, "I apologize. I will do better." And she tried. She really did try. But her heart was not in it. Her heart was nowhere. Her heart was in a hole in the ground at Pashupatinath Temple in Kathmandu, where they had scattered Lily's ashes. Her heart was at kilometer marker 23 on a mountain road. Her heart was nowhere she could reach it. But something had broken open in her chest and she did not know how to close it again. She felt the absence of the snow leopards like a physical wound. Not the constant familiar pain of losing Lily. That grief was woven into her bones now, permanent, unchangeable. She carried it with her every moment like breathing. This was different, sharp, new. The absence of Zara, of Kiran, of Asha. She picked up her phone 50 times a day to call the conservation office in Nepal. Never dialed. What would she even say? I miss them? I need to know they are okay? That makes no sense. I knew them for 7 days. I have no right to miss them, no right to need anything from them. But she did miss them, did need to know. In October, 3 months after returning to Seattle, Margaret was eating dinner alone. Frozen meal heated in the microwave because cooking for one person felt pointless. Because she had not cooked a real meal since Lily died. Because food was just fuel now, tasteless, meaningless. Her phone rang. Unknown international number. She almost did not answer. Then something made her pick up. Hello? Mrs. Chen, this is Tenzin Sherpa from Nepal Department of National Parks and Wildlife Conservation. Margaret's heart stopped. Her hand clenched around the phone so hard her knuckles went white. Oh, God. Something happened. They died. One of them died. Asha died, the pneumonia came back. I knew I should have kept him longer. I knew 1 week was not enough. I should have fought harder. I should have. The leopards are fine, Tenzin said quickly, cutting through her panic. Reading the fear in her voice because he had heard it before, had heard it that day in the research station when she screamed, "Do not let them die." They are healthy. All 3 are healthy. The cubs are growing remarkably well. Zara has gained weight. The pneumonia cleared completely. They are fine. Margaret could not breathe, could not process relief and terror and confusion all at once. Then why are you calling? We have a situation, Tenzin said carefully. What situation? Margaret asked, something cold settling in her stomach, knowing that fine and situation did not belong in the same conversation. Zara is not adapting to the facility. She is extremely stressed, aggressive toward handlers, will not eat consistently. She keeps trying to break out of the enclosure. We have had to sedate her twice to prevent injury. The cubs are picking up her anxiety. They are becoming skittish, fearful, showing signs of stress-related illness. This level of stress, if it continues, could be fatal. What does that mean? Margaret asked. But she already knew. She had taken enough biology courses, had taught enough about animal behavior. Stress kills. Chronic stress shuts down immune systems, causes organ failure, leads to death just as surely as injury or starvation. It means we have 2 options, Tenzin said. We keep them in captivity permanently. We work on managing Zara's stress. Maybe she adapts eventually. Maybe she does not. The cubs would be raised by humans, hand-fed, socialized to people. They could never be released. They would spend their entire lives in enclosures. They would be fed and safe and caged forever. Or, Margaret whispered. Or we try something we have never attempted before, Tenzin said. Something unconventional. Something that will probably get me fired if it fails. Assisted wild release. You would manage their transition back to their natural habitat. It would take months, maybe a year. It is intensive, isolated work requiring you to live in extremely remote conditions with minimal resources, and we have never done this with someone who is not a trained wildlife biologist. Margaret sat in her kitchen in Seattle, phone pressed to her ear, world tilting. Why me? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer, had known from the moment he said assisted release. Had felt something wake up in her chest for the first time in months. Because Zara trusts you, Tenzin said simply. I have worked with snow leopards for 12 years, Mrs. Chen. I know when an animal has bonded with someone. I saw it that day at the research station. The way she looked at you, the way she calmed when you were near. Zara sees you as safe. She will follow your lead. She will let you teach her cubs what she cannot teach them herself right now, because her trauma has broken something in her instincts, has made her too protective, too defensive, too afraid of everything. You want me to raise snow leopards? Margaret said, the words sounding insane even as she said them. Not raise, Tenzin corrected. Rewild. Teach them to hunt. Teach them to fear humans again. Everyone except you. Teach them to survive. and then release them back into their natural habitat. You would be the first person to attempt this with snow leopards. If it works, it could change how we rehabilitate traumatized predators worldwide. If it fails, those leopards live in cages for the rest of their lives. No pressure. Margaret closed her eyes, felt tears forming. Where? She whispered. Remote area in Upper Dalpo region. Altitude 4,500 meters. Isolated research cabin built 20 years ago for a project that was abandoned. Solar power only, no internet. Satellite phone for emergencies only. Nearest village is 5 hours by jeep. Supplies delivered once a month by porter. Just you and the leopards for 8 to 12 months. Total isolation. Total commitment. If you say yes, you cannot change your mind halfway through. Their lives depend on consistency. Margaret thought about her life in Seattle. Her job teaching students who did not care. Her empty house full of Lily's ghost. Her non-existent future. Her complete and absolute lack of anything worth staying for. I have a job, she said weakly, even as she realized how hollow that sounded. What job? Teaching classes she could barely focus on. Grading papers that meant nothing. Going through motions of a life that had ended 2 years ago. I understand this is overwhelming, Tenzin said. This is asking you to give up everything, to move to one of the most remote places on Earth, to dedicate a year of your life to animals you barely know. If you need time to think about it, to discuss with family too. When do I start? Margaret interrupted. The Upper Dalpo cabin was everything Tenzin had described, and worse. 5 hours by jeep from the nearest village, roads so rough Margaret thought her spine might snap. Then another 2 hours hiking with supplies carried by 3 porters who looked at her like she was insane. A white American woman, 56 years old, moving to 500 meters to live alone with snow leopards. They were not wrong to think she was insane. The cabin was rough stone construction, built into the mountainside for protection from wind. 1 room, maybe 4 meters by 5 meters. Wood-burning stove in the corner that would be her only heat source. Small window with shutters that did not close properly. Wooden bed frame with a thin mattress. Table. 2 chairs. Shelves. Solar panels on the roof that provided enough power for lights and a small refrigerator that ran intermittently. Nothing more. This would be home for the next year. Margaret arrived in early March with Zara and the cubs, now 5 months old and the size of large house cats, in transport crates. Tenzin stayed for 1 week to train Margaret on protocols. This is the most important thing I will tell you, he said on the first day, looking at her with complete seriousness. You minimize physical contact. No petting, no human affection. You are not their friend. You are not their mother. You are the food provider and the teacher. You are teaching them that humans mean food now, but will not always mean food. They need to learn to find their own. Understood? Margaret nodded. This would be harder than she had imagined. Tenzin showed her how to place food at increasing distances from the cabin, how to hide carcasses so Zara had to search, had to remember her hunting instincts, how to monitor from a distance without interfering, how to slowly, gradually withdraw her presence until the leopards were functioning independently. Your goal is to make yourself unnecessary, Tenzin said. If you do this right, they will eventually ignore you completely. That is success. That is what keeps them alive in the wild. He left on day 7 with warnings and instructions and supplies and satellite phone numbers for emergencies. Then Margaret was alone. Alone with 3 snow leopards at 500 meters in one of the most remote places on Earth. The first weeks were brutal in ways Margaret had not anticipated. She woke at 4:30 every morning when it was still dark, when temperatures were 15 below zero, when walking outside felt like knives in her lungs. She would dress in layers, so many layers she could barely move, and hike 12 kilometers through mountain terrain, placing barrel carcasses that conservation rangers delivered weekly at designated locations. Blue sheep, the primary prey of snow leopards. Margaret would drag frozen carcasses through snow and over rocks and up slopes until her back screamed and her legs gave out. She would place them according to Tenzin's instructions. Some obvious, some hidden, some at different altitudes. Creating a pattern that would teach Zara to search, to hunt, to remember that food did not appear magically but had to be found, stalked, killed. At first, Zara only ate what Margaret left directly outside the cabin, would not venture more than 20 meters. would not let the cubs venture at all. The trauma of losing her mate, of nearly dying, of being in captivity had broken something in her hunting instincts. She was terrified of everything, hyperprotective of the cubs to the point of dysfunction. This was the challenge. This was why captive release had failed. Trauma does not just disappear because you move an animal to a different location, but slowly, following Tenzin's instructions, following her own instincts, Margaret left the food farther away. 30 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters. Zara had to search, had to work, had to overcome her fear. Some days she refused, would pace outside the cabin making distress calls. Margaret would watch through binoculars from inside, fighting the urge to go comfort her, fighting every instinct that said this animal is suffering, help her. But helping would doom her. Helping would mean she never learned to help herself. On day 16, Zara followed a scent trail 200 meters from the cabin, found the hidden carcass, fed herself and the cubs. Margaret watched through binoculars and cried with pride and relief. One morning in early April, Margaret was returning to the cabin at dusk when she heard a sound she had never heard before. Snow Leopard victory call, a specific vocalization they make after successful hunts. She ran toward the sound, heart pounding, knowing this might be it, might be the breakthrough. Through her binoculars in the fading light, she saw Zara and the cubs surrounding a marmot, a live marmot. Zara had hunted, had caught prey, had not just scavenged carcasses Margaret left, but had actually hunted. Kieran had lunged too early and missed. Typical for cubs, they have to learn patience. But Asha, cautious, careful Asha, had waited, watched, learned from his brother's mistake. On his second attempt, he caught it. His first real hunt. His first kill. Zara made the chuffing call again. The victory sound. The others joined. Margaret, hidden behind rocks 200 meters away, cried with pride she had no right to feel. These were not her children, not her family. But watching them learn, watching them remember what they were designed to do, watching them become wild again, felt like watching something beautiful be born. As spring turned to early summer, the distance between Margaret and the leopards grew exactly as it should, and it broke Margaret's heart in ways she had not prepared for. Zara stopped approaching the cabin. The cubs followed their mother's lead. They slept in caves higher up the mountain now, natural dens that provided protection from wind and predators. They hunted on their own more frequently. Margaret would place carcasses and return the next day to find them untouched. The leopards had found their own meals, had killed marmots and pikas and even attempted a young barrel, had missed, but the attempt itself was progress, was proof of instinct returning. When Margaret left food now, which became less and less often per Tenzin's protocol, the leopards sometimes did not even come. Did not need her anymore. Did not want her presence. This was the goal. This was success. But it felt like loss. One evening in late June, Margaret saw Zara watching her from a cliff above. Just standing there at sunset, perfectly camouflaged against gray rock, almost invisible except Margaret knew how to look for them now, knew their shapes and movements and patterns. Zara stood there observing Margaret for maybe 10 minutes, did not approach, did not vocalize, just watched. Margaret raised one hand in acknowledgement. Stupid gesture, she knew. The leopard could not understand human gestures, but she did it anyway. Wanted Zara to know she saw her too. Wanted to say goodbye even though they were not saying goodbye yet, would not say goodbye for months still. Zara turned and vanished into the mountainside like smoke. Like she had never been there at all. Margaret stood alone in the meadow and let herself cry for the first time since arriving at the cabin. She had been so focused on teaching the leopards to be wild again, so focused on the daily work of placing food and monitoring behavior, and staying distant and making herself unnecessary, that she had not processed what that meant. It meant losing them. It meant saying goodbye to creatures who had, without her permission and against all logic, become important to her in ways she could not explain. These were wild animals. She had known them for months but barely interacted with them. They were not pets, not companions, not hers in any meaningful way. But she had saved them. Had watched them nearly die, and had fought to keep them alive, and had spent months now dedicating every moment to their survival. And they were surviving, were thriving, were becoming what they were always meant to be. And soon she would release them and they would vanish into hundreds of square kilometers of the most remote mountains on Earth, and she would never see them again. Would never know if they lived or died. Would never know if all this work mattered. Margaret realized she was grieving a loss that had not happened yet, grieving while the leopards were still technically under her care. But they were not hers. Never had been. She was just the bridge between captivity and wilderness. Her job was to make herself obsolete, and she was succeeding. The months passed in isolation that was sometimes peaceful and sometimes unbearable. Margaret learned to live with silence, to go days without speaking out loud, to mark time not by calendar but by the leopard's progress. By the day Kieran successfully hunted his first barrel. By the day Asha fought off a golden eagle trying to steal his kill. By the day Zara let them wander 2 kilometers from her supervision, trusting they could take care of themselves. Margaret learned to live with loneliness that was different from the loneliness she had felt in Seattle. This loneliness was clean somehow. Honest. She was alone because she chose to be, because this work required it. Not because grief had hollowed her out and left her incapable of connecting with anyone. She thought about Lily constantly, talked to her sometimes in the empty cabin, told her about the leopards. Wished Lily could see this, could know that her mother had taken everything Lily loved about wildlife conservation and was living it in the most extreme way possible. In early August, Tenzin returned for evaluation. He hiked up from the village with 2 other wildlife biologists to observe and assess. They spent 3 days watching, documenting, testing. Watched Zara hunt successfully, bringing down a barrel on her own, clean kill. Watched the cubs work together to corner prey, coordinating their movements like a practice team. Watched all 3 avoid the cabin except for occasional distant sightings. Watched them behave exactly like wild snow leopards should behave. Finally, on the 3rd evening, Tenzin sat with Margaret by the fire outside the cabin. "They are ready," he said quietly. "All my assessments indicate successful rewilding. Zara is hunting at success rates comparable to wild populations. The cubs have learned essential survival skills. They avoid humans appropriately, show no food dependency, demonstrate natural wariness. They are exhibiting completely normal wild behavior. It is time." Margaret had known this day would come, had spent 8 months preparing for it. Still felt like someone had reached into her chest and squeezed her heart until she could not breathe. "Where?" she asked, voice barely audible. "You choose," Tenzin said, "within 50 kilometers of here. Wherever you think they have the best chance at survival, at establishing territory, at living wild lives. You have studied this area for 8 months. You know the prey density, the water sources, the den locations. You know better than anyone where they should be." Margaret did not hesitate. "I know exactly where," she said. December 8th, 3 years since Lily died. 1 year since finding Zara dying in the snow. Margaret drove the Land Rover down the mountain road with 3 transport crates secured in the back. Zara, Kieran, Asha. All healthy, all wild, all ready. She did not look in the rearview mirror. If she looked at them, if she saw Zara's green eyes or heard the cubs making distress sounds because they hated the crates, hated confinement, were wild now and deserved to be free, she would cry and she needed to drive. When she reached kilometer marker 23, the place where everything had ended and begun again, she stopped. The white cross marking Lily's death was still there, weathered but standing. Margaret had placed it herself 3 years ago, had nailed it to that tree and had thought at the time that this cross would be the only mark she ever left on these mountains, the only proof that her daughter had existed and mattered and was loved. She opened the crate doors, stepped back, waited. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought she might vomit. Zara emerged first, cautious, sniffing the air, recognizing this place, knew this place. This was where it started, where she had lost her mate, lost everything, where she had dragged her cubs closer to the road and waited to die, and instead a stranger had stopped, had chosen to save instead of abandon. Kieran and Asha emerged, no longer cubs but subadults now, magnificent, powerful, everything snow leopards should be. They looked at Margaret one last time. Their pale green eyes, so much like their mother's, held intelligence and memory, and something that looked almost like understanding. But Margaret knew she was projecting human emotions onto wild animals who owed her nothing, who should fear her, who needed to fear all humans if they were going to survive. Margaret wanted to speak. Wanted to say thank you for teaching me that broken things can heal. Wanted to say you saved me as much as I saved you. Wanted to say I love you even though that makes no sense, even though you are wild animals and I am just a human who helped you survive. But she said nothing, because they were not hers anymore. Never had been. She had just been the bridge. Zara took one step toward the mountain, stopped, looked back. Her pale green eyes met Margaret's dark brown ones. Margaret swore she saw recognition there, gratitude, farewell, understanding. Impossible to know what a snow leopard thinks. But she saw it anyway, chose to believe it was real. Zara made the chuffing sound one last time, soft, intimate, only for Margaret. The sound snow leopards make to their cubs, to their mates, to those they trust. Kieran and Asha joined their mother, added their voices. Then they turned and bounded up the rocky slope, moving with the impossible grace that snow leopards possess, that makes them seem like they are flying across mountains instead of running. Within seconds, they vanished into the landscape, like they had been made of mist and stone, and belonged to these mountains in a way humans never could. Margaret stood alone on the shoulder of Highway 23. Snow began to fall, soft and steady. She walked to Lily's white cross, placed fresh white chrysanthemums at its base like she did every year. But this year she also placed something new. A small carved stone figure of 3 snow leopards she had made during the long isolated months in the cabin, carved with a knife during endless evenings when darkness came early, and she had nothing but time and memories, and the sound of wind against stone. She set it beside Lily's flowers, beside her daughter's name carved in Nepali and English. When she walked back to her Land Rover, she heard it, faint, distant, echoing off the mountains, the chuffing call of snow leopards, 3 voices, telling her they were okay, telling her goodbye, telling her thank you in the only language they had. Margaret got in her truck, started the engine. For the first time in 3 years driving past kilometer marker 23, she did not feel only pain and guilt and suffocating grief. She felt something else. Something fragile and new and terrifying. She felt peace. She felt purpose. She felt like maybe, possibly, she had done something that mattered. Something that honored Lily's passion and memory in ways that standing at her grave crying every year never could. Margaret did not return to Seattle immediately after releasing the leopards. She drove to a guest house in Kathmandu and sat in her room for 2 days, staring at the walls, processing, trying to understand what had changed inside her. Other tourists came and went through the guest house, trekkers returning from mountain adventures, families visiting temples, people with itineraries and plans and futures. Margaret had none of these things. She pulled out her phone, stared at the screen. She could call Robert, could tell him about the leopards, about this strange year, about living in isolation and teaching wild animals to survive. She could book a flight home, could return to the empty house in Seattle, return to teaching classes she did not care about, return to existing without living. Instead, she called Dr. Morrison at the Kyanjin Gompa research station. "It is Margaret Chen," she said when he answered. "I know this might sound crazy, but are you hiring?" 3 months later, Margaret was living in a small apartment in Kathmandu, working as a research coordinator for the Himalayan Snow Leopard Conservation Project. Her job was to manage data from field researchers scattered across the mountains, coordinate with local communities about human-wildlife conflict, help develop conservation strategies that protected both leopards and the people who lived in their territories. The pay was a fraction of her university salary. The work was hard. She spent hours staring at spreadsheets and camera trap photos and GPS collar data until her eyes burned. But for the first time in 3 years, Margaret woke up every morning with a reason to get out of bed that was not just going through motions until she could go back to sleep. She sold the house in Seattle, kept only what mattered. Lily's research papers carefully preserved in waterproof boxes, photographs, a few belongings that still carried her daughter's scent even after 3 years. The rest she donated or sold. Furniture that had no meaning. Kitchen equipment she would never use. Books she could not read. All of it gone. Robert was supportive in his quiet way. Called to say, "I am glad you found something. Glad you are not drowning anymore." Said he hoped she was healing. Said he would always love the woman she used to be, the mother she had been to Lily. Hoped she was becoming someone new who could be happy again someday. Margaret thanked him and meant it. They talked sometimes now, not often, but sometimes. It was enough. In April, Margaret went on a supply run to Upper Dalpo, visiting field researchers who were continuing the work she had started, checking camera trap equipment, delivering supplies. She drove past kilometer marker 23. Did not stop this time. Just whispered, "Hello, Lily. Hello, Zara. I hope you are all okay wherever you are." Kept driving. She was learning that moving forward did not mean forgetting. It meant carrying love and loss together, not letting the loss consume everything else. In June, a young researcher named Pemba came running into the office, breathless, excited, nearly knocking over his chair. "Margaret, you need to see this right now." He pulled up camera trap footage on the computer. Remote camera, Upper Dalpo region, 53 kilometers from where Margaret had released the leopards. The timestamp showed the video was from 3 days ago. The footage showed a female snow leopard with distinctive rosette patterns crossing a high ridge at dawn. 2 subadults followed her. One darker with bolder patterns, one lighter with more delicate features. All 3 healthy, moving with confidence through their territory. Margaret leaned closer to the screen, hands shaking. "That is them. That is Zara. I am certain. Look at the rosette pattern on her right shoulder, that unique spacing. And that is Kieran in front. See how bold he is. How he keeps looking back at his mother like he is showing off. And Asha behind, more cautious. That is them. They survived." Pemba grinned. "You did it. You actually did it. Everyone said captive-raised snow leopards could not be successfully released. But you proved them wrong. They survived. They are thriving. The footage was 3 days old, but it was proof. Proof that the impossible sometimes happened anyway. Proof that broken things could be made whole again if you were patient enough and worked hard enough and believed even when believing seemed stupid. Proof that choosing to fight for something, even when the outcome was uncertain, even when the pain was unbearable, sometimes mattered more than you could imagine. Margaret requested a copy of the video, watched it 100 times that night in her apartment, cried through most of them, but the crying felt different now. Not the drowning grief of year 1, not the numb emptiness of year 2. This was softer, cleaner somehow, like rain after drought. Like proof that she had not failed completely, had not failed Lily because nothing could have saved Lily, but had not failed these leopards, had given them a chance, and they had taken it, and were alive because of choices she had made. In August, Margaret received an email from Dr. Morrison. There is a PhD student looking for an advisor for snow leopard research project on conservation genetics and population dynamics. I thought of you. You have the field experience now. You have the credentials from your years teaching. You understand these animals in ways most researchers never will. Interested? Margaret had not considered returning to academia. But this was different. This was not teaching undergraduates who did not care. This was shaping the next generation of people who would protect these mountains, these animals, this impossible, fragile ecosystem that had given her a reason to keep breathing when she thought she had none left. The PhD student was a young Nepali woman named Sangeeta, 24 years old, brilliant, passionate, reminded Margaret of Lily in ways that hurt and healed simultaneously. Same fierce dedication, same refusal to accept limitations. Same love for these mountains and these animals that was bigger than fear or comfort or common sense. They worked together developing genetic studies of snow leopard populations across the Himalayas, understanding family groups and migration patterns and survival rates and everything that would help protect a species that was disappearing. Margaret threw herself into the work with intensity she had not felt since before Lily died. Some days were still hard. Anniversary dates hit like physical blows. December 8th. Lily's birthday, March 15th. The day they scattered her ashes, June 3rd. Random moments when Margaret would see something and think, I need to tell Lily about this, before remembering with fresh pain that she could not, would never be able to share anything with her daughter again. But the hard days became less frequent. The good days, Days when research went well, when Sangeeta made breakthroughs, when camera traps captured footage of thriving leopards, when communities reported successful coexistence strategies, those days became more common. Margaret was not happy. Not in the way she had been before the accident. That version of herself was gone, had died on that mountain road with her daughter. But this new Margaret, scarred and rebuilt, was learning that survival was not weakness. That continuing to exist after the worst had happened was not betrayal. That building something new from the ruins of the old life was not forgetting. It was honoring. It was saying, yes, that person mattered, that love mattered so much that I will carry it forward into whatever comes next. December 8th arrived again. 4 years since Lily died. 2 years since finding Zara. Margaret woke in her apartment in Kathmandu, felt the familiar dread of this date, but also something new. Anticipation. She had a plan this year. She drove to Langtang with Sangeeta and Dr. Morrison and Pemba. At kilometer marker 23, they placed new flowers at Lily's memorial. White chrysanthemums like always. But they also set up camera traps in locations where Zara's family had been sighted most frequently. Not to disturb them, not to interfere. Just to observe, to document, to understand. To see if the family was still together, still surviving, still wild. They hiked 4 hours to a high ridge where parl gathered in large herds during winter months. They set up equipment, checking coordinates, discussing research protocols, documenting prey density and habitat use. As the sun began to set, painting the Himalayas in shades of orange and gold that made the mountains look like they were on fire, Sangeeta suddenly grabbed Margaret's arm and pointed, barely breathing. Look. There. On a cliff face 800 meters away. Perfectly camouflaged against gray rock. 3 snow leopards. An adult female. 2 subadults, nearly full-grown now. All watching the Barrel herd below, evaluating, strategizing, working together. Even from this distance, Margaret knew. Zara, Kiran, Asha, alive, wild, free. Doing exactly what snow leopards were meant to do. Surviving in the harshest environment on Earth through skill and strength and the bonds that held their small family together. Dr. Morrison had his binoculars up, watching, unable to contain his excitement. Incredible. Perfect condition. Look at their hunting formation. See how Zara is positioning to drive prey toward where the cubs are waiting. They have learned everything. This is textbook cooperative hunting. Sangeeta was filming on her camera. This is amazing data. Do you realize how rare this is? To document successful rehabilitation and release like this? Most captive-raised predators die within 6 months, but these 3 are thriving. Margaret just watched, did not speak, did not move, felt tears streaming down her face and did not bother wiping them away. The leopards began to move, stalking down the cliff face with impossible grace, working together to surround part of the herd. Margaret did not stay to watch the hunt. That was their life now. Their world. Not hers. She had done her part. They had done the rest. As they hiked back to the vehicles in the fading light, Dr. Morrison walked beside Margaret. Lily would be proud, you know, he said quietly, of the work you are doing, of what you accomplished with those leopards, of you becoming someone new instead of staying broken. She would be so proud. Margaret nodded, throat too tight to speak. She hoped he was right. She hoped somewhere, somehow, her daughter knew that Margaret had not given up, had not let the grief destroy her completely, had found a way to transform the worst pain of her life into something that mattered, something that saved lives, something that honored the passion Lily had felt for these mountains and these impossible, beautiful creatures. That night, back in her apartment, Margaret looked at the photograph she kept on her desk. Lily at 25, standing on a mountain ridge with a snow leopard camera trap behind her, smiling that brilliant smile that could light up entire rooms, hair blowing in the wind, completely in her element, completely alive. Next to it, Margaret placed a new photograph. The camera trap image of Zara and her cubs, healthy and wild. Proof that broken things could survive, could heal, could thrive again if given the chance. Margaret whispered to both photographs, to her daughter's memory, and to the leopards she would never see again. Thank you. For teaching me that love does not end when life does. for showing me that grief and purpose can exist together, for giving me a reason to wake up every morning and try again, for reminding me that survival, just survival, is sometimes the bravest thing we can do. The work continued. Years passed. Margaret spent them building the assisted release program into a formal conservation protocol, published research papers that other conservationists began citing, developed methodologies that worked not just for snow leopards but for other traumatized predators: lynx, clouded leopards, amur leopards, Andean mountain cats. What had started as a desperate attempt to save 3 dying animals became a model for conservation worldwide. Sangeeta completed her PhD, brilliant research on snow leopard genetics that helped identify critical habitat corridors across the Himalayas, helped governments make better decisions about land use and development, helped protect territories that leopards needed to survive. She accepted a position with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, continuing the work, expanding it to other species and other countries. Margaret attended her graduation ceremony, felt pride that reminded her of watching Lily receive her doctorate, but without the sharp edge of pain that used to accompany every memory. The pain was still there. Always would be. But softer now. Integrated into who she had become instead of defining everything she was. In her 6th year in Nepal, Margaret met someone. His name was Dorje, a Sherpa man in his early 60s, guide and conservation ranger who had spent 40 years in these mountains. He was kind, patient, understood loss because he had lost his wife to altitude sickness 12 years before, understood grief because he carried his own. They did not fall in love in the desperate way of young people who think love will save them. They fell into companionship, understanding, the quiet comfort of 2 people who had survived the worst and were learning to live again. He did not try to replace what she had lost, did not expect her to forget Lily or stop grieving or become someone she was not. He just stood beside her as she carried it all. On their first trek together into Upper Dolpo, checking camera traps and monitoring leopard populations, they found evidence of Zara's family again. Fresh tracks in snow, scat samples, kill sites, but also something new that made Margaret's heart stop. A 4th set of tracks, much smaller, younger. Margaret analyzed the evidence carefully, measured stride length and paw size, felt her hands shaking as she realized what it meant. Zara had a new cub, born in the wild, surviving in the wild. Part of the ecosystem again. The cycle continuing. Life persisting despite everything. Dorje watched Margaret cry and smile simultaneously as she photographed the tiny paw prints. "This is what you fought for," he said quietly, his English accented but clear. "This exact moment. This proof that it works. That they can not only survive but thrive and create new life. You should be very proud." "I am," Margaret whispered. "I really am." Years passed. Margaret turned 60, then 65. Her hair went completely gray. Her body ached from high altitude and long hikes and the wear of living in harsh conditions. But she kept working, kept fighting for the mountains and the animals and the impossible, beautiful, fragile ecosystem that had saved her life when she thought nothing could. The camera trap network expanded across Nepal, Bhutan, India, Pakistan, China. They documented Zara for 8 more years, watched her raise 2 more litters, watched Kiran and Asha establish their own territories, find mates, raise their own cubs, watched the family line continue, spreading across the mountain range, contributing to genetic diversity that would help the species survive. In Margaret's 9th year in Nepal, the camera traps stopped capturing images of Zara. They searched, sent rangers to her last known territory, expanded the search radius, checked every camera within 100 kilometers. Found nothing. Margaret knew what it meant. Zara had died. Old age, probably, 14 or 15 years old, which was remarkably long for a wild snow leopard. Or maybe a failed hunt or rockfall, or any of the 1,000 dangers that these mountains held. She had lived longer than most wild snow leopards, had beaten impossible odds, had raised multiple litters successfully, had done everything a snow leopard was meant to do, but knowing it was natural did not make it hurt less. Margaret took a week off work, hiked alone to kilometer marker 23, spent 3 days there in a small tent, sitting by Lily's memorial, speaking to the memory of her daughter, told her about everything that had happened, about the leopards and the work and learning to live again. She spoke to the memory of Zara, thanked her for trusting a broken woman with 2 dying cubs, thanked her for teaching lessons about survival and resilience and love that transcended species. She placed stones in a small cairn beside Lily's memorial. 1 stone for Zara, 1 for Lily, 1 for herself, for the woman who died on this road 3 years after her daughter, and the woman who had slowly, painfully, been reborn through the impossible work of teaching wild animals to survive. When she returned to Kathmandu, Sangeeta was waiting with news that made everything hurt and heal simultaneously. "Margaret, you need to see this." New camera trap footage from Zara's last known territory. The video showed a young female snow leopard with 2 small cubs, maybe 3 months old, hunting successfully, teaching them to stalk prey with the patience that means survival. The rosette patterns were distinctive, unmistakable inherited characteristics that Margaret had studied for years. It was Asha, Zara's daughter. Asha, who Margaret had bottle-fed every 3 hours, who had nearly died from pneumonia, who had been so cautious as a cub. Now a mother herself. Alive. Thriving. Continuing the cycle. Raising her own family in the same mountains where she had almost died, where a stranger had saved her, where she had learned to survive. Margaret watched the footage, laughing and crying simultaneously. Sangeeta asked, concerned, "Are you okay?" "I am okay," Margaret said, and meant it for the first time in years. "I am really okay." On December 8th, 12 years after Lily's death, 10 years after finding Zara, Margaret made what she thought would be her final pilgrimage to kilometer marker 23. She was 68 years old, planning to retire next year, ready to pass the conservation work to younger researchers like Sangeeta, who would continue what had been started, who would keep fighting for mountains and leopards and impossible survival. She placed white chrysanthemums at Lily's memorial, like always. Placed new stones in the cairn for the leopards she had known, the ones who had died, the ones still surviving somewhere in these mountains. She stood on the roadside, looking up at the peaks, at the impossible heights where life persisted against all odds, where snow leopards hunted and raised cubs and survived in the harshest place on Earth. And she felt, for the first time since the accident, complete peace. The grief had not disappeared. Would never disappear. She still missed Lily every single day. Still woke sometimes with tears on her face from dreams where her daughter was alive, and then the waking realization that she was not. But the grief no longer consumed everything else. It existed alongside joy, purpose, love, pride, all the complicated emotions that made up a full life. Margaret had learned what the snow leopards had taught her. That survival was not about forgetting or moving on or leaving behind. It was about carrying everything with you, the loss and the love, and choosing every single day to keep going anyway. To put one foot in front of the other. To do the next right thing. To help when you could. To fight for what mattered. To believe that broken things could be made whole again, not the same as before, never the same, but whole in a different way, stronger sometimes for having been broken and rebuilt. As she turned to walk back to her vehicle, Margaret heard it one last time. Faint, distant, echoing off the mountains, the chuffing call of snow leopards, multiple voices this time, old and young, Asha's family. The continuation of everything that started on this road 10 years ago. Proof that the impossible sometimes happened anyway. Proof that choosing to save instead of abandon, to fight instead of surrender, to live instead of just exist, sometimes mattered more than anyone could imagine. Margaret raised one hand in farewell, knowing they could not see her, knowing they probably were not even calling to her, just communicating with each other in their wild language. But she chose to believe, chose to feel, that somewhere in that sound was recognition, gratitude, connection across species and years, and all the pain that both humans and animals carry in their impossible journey to survive. She got in her Land Rover, started the engine, drove down the mountain road toward Kathmandu, toward her apartment, toward Dorje waiting with dinner, toward another day of work that mattered, toward a life that was smaller and quieter than the one she had before, but was hers, was real, was enough. And as she drove, Margaret Chen smiled, touched the photograph of Lily she kept on the dashboard, whispered, I love you, baby. I miss you every day. But I am okay now. I am finally okay. And knew with absolute certainty that somewhere in the highest mountains on Earth, snow leopards were surviving, were thriving, were raising new generations, were continuing the cycle of life that was fierce and fragile and beautiful beyond words. And that was enough. That was everything. That was grace.